Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on the Masechtas Rosh Hashana daf Chavtes, we are going to begin about 13 lines from the top of Chavtes about Aleph by the Mishnah. The pasuk famously says, "V'hoyakasher Yar Moshe Yado v'Gabar Yisrael." When Moshe would lift up his hands, then the Bnei Yisrael were successful in battle. The Mishnah, "V'chi Yadav Shel Moshe Asos Melchama or Sharvis Melchama." How is it that him lifting his hands or lowering his hands, what does that have to do with the success in the battle? When he lifted up his hands, he was directing them toward Hashem, as though up in the sky. And therefore, when they dedicated their hearts, they became strong. Otherwise, they fell. In order for the Bnei Yisrael to be successful, they needed to have God on their side. Similarly, the pasuk says that we should take a fiery serpent and you should wrap it up around a pole. Anyone who would look at this would be able to magically live. I obviously don't mean to use the word magically, because obviously this is in the hands of Hashem, but it seems difficult to understand. After all, is it this snake that's wrapped around this pole? Is that what causes one to live or die? Those manchi Yisrael mistaken klapi mal again. When they look upward at this pole, they're not just looking at the pole, but it's causing them to look at the Shemayim. Shabnas liib and levim shmashamayim hoy misrap, and they healed. V'imlav hoyu nimoikin. Otherwise, they were sickly and died. And then the Mishnah, on a seemingly totally different topic, says, that when it comes to the fulfilling the obligation of another individual, if you are a cher shadvakatan, someone who's deaf, mute, mentally deranged, or a minor, you cannot fulfill other people's obligations because you're not mechuyev. And this is what the Mishnah concludes with. Zeklal, this is the general rule. You have to be obligated to be able to cause other people to fulfill their obligation by you doing that mitzvah. Tanurban. The Gemara says, everyone has to hear the shofar. Kohanim, Levim, Yisrael. Which is hard to understand. Why would you think Kohanim, Levim, and Yisrael, and regular Jewish people shouldn't be able to? The Chiddush maybe lies in the next parts. Gerim, Vavodim, Shechrarim, freed slaves, Vatumtim, Vadroginus, whether it's a person who displays both sides, both sexual organs, or one who does not have either, nonetheless they're mechuyev. Someone who's half slave, half free, which is generally understood as someone who has a partnership, and one of those two partners freed the slave, the other one did not. So tumdum es minoi v'lo es she'eno minoi. So we say when it comes to a tumtum, it's not so true. When it comes to a tumtum, he cannot be mitzi not his own, not someone who is not a tumtum. Androgynous mitzias minoi of alois she'eno minoi. But androgynous, he can be mitzi another androgynous. However, not someone who is not an androgynous. So again, it's interesting. It's coupling really the seifa of the statement is not telling us that all these people actually are mechuyev, but it again, or whether they can be mitzi others. So if you're half a slave, you cannot be mitzi someone who is like you or someone who's not like you. So we're going to understand that a little bit better, but first let's see the first part, which seems very difficult to understand because it's so obvious. If Jewish people are not mechuyev to hear the shofar, then who else? So this is question 10. Kasha v'hari pshita. So the Gemara says like this: Kohanim is tzrichalei. The chiddush is that Kohanim have to hear the tekiah. Why not? Why would you think not? So the pasuk says Yom Teruah Yelachem, that it's a day of Teruah. So Mandalay say El b'tekiah dechad yoima. That's only someone who the tekiah is only on a yoim, only one day a year. Who the mechuyev? V'hani Kohanim hoyel v'isnehu b'tekiah istechol Hashana. When it comes to the various karbanos, the sounding is blared all the time. Now when they bring a carbon ola, they used to blow trumpets. So because there's no real novelty in hearing these sounds, because they blow an instrument every day, so you think maybe that mechuyev in the hearing of the shofar. Kamashwan. So where's the mean? Midami hasim chatzos is a shofar. They're two different instruments. One's a trumpet and one's a shofar. So just because they blow the chatzos all the time doesn't mean that's how they're going to blow the shofar. They can't blow the shofar. El itzrach. There's a different havamina. Sakadach lemin hoil. Utanan shavah hayavel Rosh Hashana with the kiyom of rachais. We said that yovel, specifically on Yom Kippur, when we blow the shofar to free the slaves and also to let land go back, etc. So it's the same when it comes to the Tekiyah as well as the brachos that are said in 9 brachos. So mandi isim b'mitzvahs hayovel isim b'mitzvahs Rosh Hashana. The fact that we're linking them together must be only people who are mechuyev the mitzvahs pertaining to Yovel or mechuyev the mitzvahs pertaining to Rosh Hashanah in the shofar. The hani kohanim hoyel leis of mitzvahs hayovel. When it comes to kohanim, they do not have the same laws of Yovel did not. Kohanim levim moichin l'oylam. When it comes to their mechira, it is a sale which is forever. And they have the ability to redeem forever. So unlike when it comes to Israel, in which the properties go back to their original owners on Yovel, so since the rules of Yovel don't apply, maybe you would think also the mitzvahs of Rosh Hashanah don't apply either. Again, it's a pretty interesting vart that you would actually think just because on Yom Kippur and Yovel it doesn't apply, so the whole idea of the shofar doesn't have the same meaning. So therefore, perhaps a shofar doesn't have the same meaning for a Kohen on Yom Kippur, on Yovel, therefore we don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah for them either. Kamash 1, that's interesting what the Kamash 1 is, but L'chayra, the Kamash 1 is telling you that that's not a proper, even though it's true, we are making this connection, but it doesn't make any difference. Still the din is that you still have to hear the shofar. When it comes to someone who's a half a slave, he cannot be moitzi anyone. So Amar Rav Huna la'atzmo moitzi. However, l'chayra, according to this, it means for himself he could be moitzi. Amar le Rav Nachman Rav Huna. So Maishna lachem delo. 1 second, let's understand this. Why can't he be moitzi other people? And this is question TA13. TA13. Somewhere around here, asks, Ha'im chatzi evim chatzi ben chayrin yochel tko b'shofar atzmo umadua. So why is he allowed to blow the shofar for himself, and why? So we're going to end up seeing umaskana what the din is. So he says, Ma'isha decherem delo, because the lo asi sad avdos umapik sad cheirus, because he's half a slave, so that element of being half a slave can't fulfill the obligation of the side which is free. So maybe we should say the same thing when it comes to yourself. Asi sad abdos didei, umapik sad cheres didei. It shouldn't work. So Elo Amar Rav Nachman apol atzma inim moitzi, and this is actually the answer that he's not motzi even himself. Tanya mihachi misha chesed ben chayrin apol atzma inim moitzi. Tani avo bered Rav Zera hakol brachos. Interesting din. Even if you already fulfilled the obligation, when it comes to all brachos, we'll see an exception to that in a moment, a person could still fulfill other people's obligation. The question is, why is that allowed? So why is that? So Rashi tells us something unbelievable, an unbelievable shot, which is actually question 11. Mahatam says, Dear Shoes, 11th question, what's the reason? That if you're not obligated, you can't fulfill someone else's obligation. You already fulfilled your obligation. Look at this incredible Rashi. Rashi says, Shahari kol Yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh b'mitzvos. Because there's an in of arvos, a revos, that because we have this connection, even though I did the mitzvah, you also need to do a mitzvah. And you doing a mitzvah and doing the right thing also influences me. It's a good thing that you do the right thing. And therefore, I also have some element of a chiyuv to make sure that you fulfill the mitzvahs as well. Okay, it's something to think about, the exact meaning behind it, but there's tremendous depth behind this. So let's see the last line in the Gemara. When it comes to the bracha you say on bread, and Rashi says, Ushar birchas peros, when it comes to, let's say, smelling fragrances or eating fruits, the brachos, the only reason why we say brachos is brought down in the 6th parak in Masechtas Brachos. You're not allowed to derive benefit from this world unless you make a bracha. Bezo in kan arvus. There's no arvus when it comes to that. Shenu chayva al adam lo lisne v'lo levarich. There's no chiyuv, right? It's just that when you want to enjoy something, you have to make a bracha. Okay. So therefore, if let's say I don't have bread in front of me, I cannot say hamotzi for you if I don't eat it. So chutz me berachas alecha berachas yain. Also, when it comes to brit gafen, if I want to drink wine and say hagafen and you hear me, of course that's okay. But if I don't have wine in front of me, that's an issue. She'im lo yatsa moitzi. So if I was in yotza, it can be moitzi. Im yatsa in a moitzi. Boy, Rabbi. So Rabbi asked the following questions. We continue with Chavtas and Beis. Okay. How about by berachas halechem shel matzah? When it comes to the bracha on the lechem, obviously we're talking about matzah. Says Rashi, shel achilas matzah. Shemarvarchin lefnei hamoitzi. We say hamotzi al achilas matzah. Uberchas hayayin shel kiddush hayoim. How about the yayin on kiddush hayom? Mahu kivan dechayvahu mabik. Since there's a chiyuv for you to do this, even though you fulfilled your obligation already. Let's say you already ate the matzah, right? You already made kiddush. So the din is, but they have a chiyuv, and since they have a chiyuv, so you can be mapik. Says Rashi, achilas matzah chayvolav, v'chein kiddush hayom chayvolav, v'hi esher shalo bahana, v'hana i esher below bracha. Nimsas a mitzvah tuli beberachas hana mepik. There's a connection. O dilma bracha lav chayvahu. Maybe the bracha is not the chayiv, says Rashi. Beberachas hanahena lav chayva mitzvah asya. Raf b'chol hanos who no hegas. So again, the question is, can you make a bracha for someone else for these things which are mitzvah connected, these foods which are mitzvah connected? Hashma, Yom Rav Ashim, Ki Havin and Bei Rav, Papi Havin Mekadosh one, he would make kiddush. V'chi Havi Asi Arise Medabra, and his sharecropper would come from the field, from his work. Havin Mekadosh Lahu, he would make kiddush for him again. So obviously, even though he fulfilled his obligation, he can do it on behalf of someone else. So therefore, this is actually the famous kasha when it comes to berchas chasanim, or when it comes to the bracha at a wedding, and the person says a bracha brei pri hagafen, they are not necessarily drinking from it, or do they drink from the kos when they do berchas eresin? So again, the question is totally the mitzvah. So we see over here, if you do a mitzvah connected to food, apparently you don't have to eat. You can fulfill someone else's obligation. The Gedolei Achronim that discuss this at great detail. Tarabanan. A person should not literally spread a sheet for guests. But Rashi says it means don't say birchas hamotzi for them. Unless you're also eating the bread. However, there is an exception. You are allowed to say this bracha, even though you're not going to eat, if it's for your child, to teach them how to say brachos. When it comes to Hallel, as well as the reading of the Megillah, even though you were already Yaitze, then you can be Moitzi other people as well. Hanulach Ra'uhu Beistin, Hanulach Ra'uhu Beistin, Hanulach Ra'uhu Beistin. We're now going to continue with the last paragraph of this Masechta. Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashana Shechol Yos B'Shabbos. Let's say that Rosh Hashana falls out on Saturday. B'Mikdash, if it was in the base of Mikdash, Hayu Taikin, they would still blow the shofar. Avolo b'Medina. There's a machlokus. What does Medina mean? Rashi says Lo b'Yerushalayim lo b'Gvulin. It means nowhere, even in Yerushalayim, they wouldn't do so. Some people read that Avolo b'Medina means outside of the base of Mikdash. But again, according to Pashut Pshat Rashi, it says even in Yerushalayim they would not blow. V'shachar Beis HaMikdash, once the Beis HaMikdash is no longer around, he's going to be Yochanan Zaka, Shahu Yitaitim B'chol Makom Sheish Bo Beistin. He would still, on Shabbos, blow the shofar anywhere there was a Beistin. On Shabbos, of course, what we're talking about. Amar Belezer, Lo Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan Zaka El B'Yavne B'Vad. The only time he instituted this was in Yavne, says Rashi. Shahayis Hashem Sanhedrin Gedolah. That's where the Sanhedrin was. Avalo, says Rashi, but based in Shel Esrim Shloisha. Not just a regular 23, certainly not a 3 member based in. It had to be the Sanhedrin Gedolah of 71, which was stationed in Yavne. That was the only place where they would blow shofar. Avalo, so they said back, no, Echad Yavne, Echad Kol Makom Sheish Lo Based in. Not necessarily the case. Anywhere there's a based in. We'll understand what exactly that line means. We'll see the very end of this daf. Furthermore, Zoysa Yerushalayim Yisera al Yavna. This is how Yerushalayim had won over Yavna. Shekol Ir Shehiroya, any city that was able to see, the Shamas, and they could hear. And Karaivan was close, V'yachoyu Labo, and they were able to get there when those was in the Tchum. So during that, if that was the case, Taikin, those people can blow. However, Yavna lo hoya Taikin il bebesin lulvad. Only mamish in the basin did they blow, not in any place in the vicinity in the city, but dafka in one place. However, when it comes to Yerushalayim, if you're within the proximity, that's okay. So again, this is an interesting reading because it's mashma. Again, you have to understand what Shot and Rashi, but it seems like going back in the Reisha, Medina is referring to. The question is that referring to Yerushalayim or only out of Yerushalayim? So again, you have to fit that into this last statement. Min Hanamili. So for Gemara, how do we know this whole idea about blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashana, on Shabbos, in the Mikdash? So Amar Rabbi Levi Bar Lachma, Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, Kosav Echad. On one hand, the pasuk says Shabbosayin should only be zikaron teruah, just to remember it. You're not actually physically doing anything. Now you're actually going to blow the shofar. So what are you doing? Are you doing it, or is it just you remember? So Lukasha kan b'yom shechol yos b'Shabbos kan b'yom tov shechol yos b'chol. So this is coming to allude to the fact that there's times that if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, that we will not blow the shofar. It'll just be a zikaron. So Amar Rabbi said, 1 second. We know that there's inshvus b'mikdash, but there's a pasuk that tells you not supposed to blow the shofar on Shabbos, on Rosh Hashanah, so it should never be allowed to be done, even the Beis HaMikdash. So that itself perhaps shows that cannot be shot in the pasuk. Voted furthermore, holav malachahi, it's not a malacha. The itzur kral imyute, that you would need a pasuk to exclude it. The Tanid Beis Shmuel, kol malachas abadol sas. You're not allowed to do any of the lamatas malachos. Yatzas satkir shayfer, or dias apas, the fashioning of bread onto the oven. Shehi chachma vein a malacha. It's not a malacha. So it's not a malacha, so the pasuk doesn't need to tell you, oh, you're allowed to or you're not allowed to do it. What do you mean? It's not a malacha. So why would the pasuk need to tell you whether you are or not allowed to do this? It's true. When it comes to blowing the shofar, one is allowed to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, on Shabbos, midiraisa. It's not an issue. So why don't we do it? And this is one of the most unbelievable pshat, and listen to this. Everyone is obligated to hear the shofar. Not everyone's an expert. Not everyone knows how to blow the shofar properly. So what may happen? Just like on a lulav, you can't take a lulav on Shabbos. You can't read the Megillah, even though Purim doesn't fall out on Shabbos, but Shushan Purim could fall out on Shabbos. So you don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. So they would actually have to read on Erev Shabbos, like what we do in Chutz La'aretz on the 14th of Adar. But it tells us also you can't blow the shofar. Why? Because this one Yid may end up not knowing what to do, and he's going to end up violating by carrying it Daled Amos to learn. So you can imagine such a thing. The tremendous value in hearing the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, because this one person who's uneducated doesn't know how to blow the shofar, and he may come to violate an Isser. So again, it goes back to the Gemara we said before, Kol Yisrael Rebbe, that we are all so connected, and if we also understood the significance of making and doing an Aveira is something which is so horrendous. And we should also, not just for ourselves, we should do whatever we can to not cause other people to fall. Therefore, even though I could benefit greatly from hearing the shofar, it'll inspire me to do tshuva, it's not worth the possibility of one yid in Yenam of making this mistake. So Tanrabanan. One time it happened, Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, it does happen. Everyone in the city was gathered in the city, they all went to Yavnes, says Rashi, they wanted to be able to hear it. Because after all, they're rogil in Yerushalayim like this, so now they're in Yavne, they want to hear it. So Amalahem Rabbi Yochanan Zaki livnei Basera Niska. So he said to Bnei Batera, says Rashi, Gedoili Hadar Hayu. He was one of the great people there. And he said, blow the shofar. Amalo, so he said, Nadun, says Rashi, im yesh ligzar apamakum bastin shemayet lena. You should be geyser that there's an issue that maybe someone will end up carrying it there too. He says, no, first blow the shofar and then maybe afterwards make the gzera. In other words, first do the mitzvah. La'achar shetaku, after they blew the shofar, amalu nadain, so maybe now you should make the gzera. So Mulhen, kvar nishma karen biyavna, then meshiven la'achar ma'isa. He says that it's already been heard, the horn in Yavna, and we can't ask now if it's allowed after the action took place. It's an interesting shakavatari why he said it this way, but basically the idea was that he was able to get people to hear the sounds of the shofar in Yavna even after the base Hamikdash. Rabbi Lezer lu hiskin Rabbi Yochanan Zake el bi Yavna bavad. Amalo echad Yavna v'echad kol makam sheish bo basin. So Amalo haina tanakam. L'char it's the same thing as the original statement. So hikamenayu beidina da'akroi. So a basin which is temporary. And we're going to conclude with this line looking at Rashi. Tanakama, according to the Tanakama, takina, they would still blow the shofar there. Vatana de amrulo sabar echad Yavna v'echad kol makam sheish lo basin. It means based in Kavua. Dumed Yavna. It has to be comparable to Yavna, which is based in Kavua. If it's not based in Kavua, then a person will not be able to blow the shofar in such a temporary place. Let's continue with, we're going to stop there, but let's look at question 12. Be'elu min koimois, hiskun Rav Yochanan Zakkai achar churban sheyisku afilu b'Shabbos. 3 answers. So according to the Tanakama, any place there's a basin, even if it's akroi, even if it's a temporary basin. Rabbi Lezer, it's only in Biyavna. And the Tana, the Seifa, the Chol Makam Sheish based in Kavua, Duma Diavna. Adkan.